Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are strapping in for an economic expedition, you could say. We're going to the cold, dark waters off the coast of Norway.
Yeah, our mission is to really dig into this study that tackles a huge question. What's the actual economic value of deep sea habitat? We're talking cold, hard cash linked to damage.
It sounds straightforward, but for years it was mostly assumption, right? Like we knew deep sea trawling was bad for fragile ecosystems.
Exactly. But this paper, published back in 2010, it really went further. It aimed to quantify pretty precisely the link between habitat destruction and, well, major losses in commercial fishing.
Okay, so let's name the paper. It's estimating linkages between redfish and cold water coral on the Norwegian coast. Lead author is Naomi S. Foley, with Kahui, Armstrong, and Van Rensburg.
Right. And it's fundamental because they applied a really rigorous method to try and put a number, a price tag, on ecological damage.
How did they do that? What was the approach?
They used something called the production function approach. So think of it like fishery revenue is the output of a factory. And they treated this essential habitat, the cold water corals, or CWC, as a vital piece of machinery, an input, just as critical as, say, the fishing boats or the fuel.
Ah, so the question becomes, if you damage that specific machine, the coral, what happens to your factory's output, the fish revenue?
Precisely. And this CWC is so important because of this concept called essential fish habitat, EFH.
Right, EFH. That's basically defined as the waters in the seabed, the substrate that fish need for, well, everything. Spawning, breeding, feeding, growing up.
Exactly. And these cold water coral ecosystems, they're kind of like deep sea oases, super biodiverse, often built by this Corallophilia pertusa.
But here's the kicker, right? They're essentially non-renewable on human timescales.
Absolutely. And under massive pressure.
So to grasp the economics, we need to know who we're talking about fish-wise.
Yes, the main character here is the redfish, specifically the golden redfish, Sebastus marinus.
And these aren't small fish, are they?
No, not at all. They're quite impressive, can live up to 60 years, grow to a meter long, and they became really important commercially in Norway starting around the mid-1980s.
Okay, and how did the researchers know these specific fish relied on these specific corals?
That's a great point. It came from direct observation using underwater cameras, ROVs. These surveys confirmed that redfish were, statistically speaking, the only fish species down there showing a significant preference for hanging out on the coral reefs compared to off-reef areas.
Wow, the only one.
Yeah, they saw them in dense groups, and interestingly, they often spotted females that looked swollen, presumably pregnant, using the reefs. Suggest refuge, maybe spawning or nursery grounds.
So a clear functional link, which makes the next part even more worrying.
Because despite being valuable, the redfish stocks were, well, in trouble. Catch levels had been dropping pretty sharply since those mid-80s highs. They hit a historical low. Low enough that by 2006, they were put on the Norwegian red list as threatened species. Scientists pointed to recruitment failure, basically. Not enough young fish surviving to replace the ones being caught or dying off.
Okay, so we have the species in decline, the redfish, and we have the likely culprit for habitat loss.
Deep sea bottom trawling.
Yeah.
It's widely recognized as the single biggest threat to these CWC ecosystems.
You mentioned non-renewable. Just how slow are we talking?
We're talking incredibly slow. Lophilia pertusa, this main reef-building coral, it grows maybe 4 to 25 millimeters a year.
Millimeter. That's like barely half an inch at the top end.
Exactly. So you can imagine a heavy trawl net scraping the bottom can just obliterate decades, maybe centuries of growth in minutes. It's that timescale mismatch that's so concerning.
And the scale of the damage already done, was it significant?
It was. The scientific estimates at the time suggested that somewhere between 30 and 50% of Norway's total CWC reef area, estimated around 2,000 square kilometers, had already been impacted or destroyed by fishing.
30 to 50%, that's a huge range. But even the low end is massive.
It is. And that range, that 30 to 50%, became a key piece of information for the economic modeling they did.
Right, so they have the ecological problem framed. How do they bridge that gap to economics?
Yeah.
How do you turn a broken reef into a specific loss in fishery profit?
Okay, this is where the methodology gets interesting. They built two competing bioeconomic models. Both were based on a classic framework, the Gordon-Schaefer model, if you're familiar with it.
Yep. Used a lot in fisheries.
Right. And they used historical data, a time series from 1986 up to 2002. They were essentially setting up two different ecological stories and using the data to see which one fit reality better.
Story number 1.
Model A was the strong version, the Essential Fish Habitat Model, or EFH. This assumes the CWC is absolutely critical, life or death. If the coral habitat disappears entirely, goes to zero, the redfish population dependent on it collapses, perishes.
Okay, that's the hardline view. And the alternative.
Model B was the softer version, the facultative habitat model. This one assumes, well, the coral is nice to have, it's preferred. Maybe it helps spawning, protects the young fish better, boosts the stock.
But it's not essential for survival.
Exactly. In Model B, if the coral disappears, the redfish stock might decline, become less productive, but it wouldn't necessarily vanish completely. They could theoretically survive elsewhere, just maybe not as well.
So, 2 competing hypotheses tested against the data. What data did they feed into these models?
They used the recorded redfish harvest, measured in tons, year by year, and fishing effort, standardized as days at sea.
Standardized, meaning they accounted for boats getting better over time.
Precisely. They factored in about a 3% improvement in fishing efficiency each year due to technology, better nets, better sonar,
Yeah.
That's crucial so you don't mistake better tech for changes caused by the habitat.
Makes sense. And how did they model the coral decline itself?
They didn't have exact year-by-year data on coral area, so they modeled it as a linear decline over the study period, falling somewhere within that estimated 30 to 50% total loss range.
Okay.
And importantly, they assumed the destruction effectively stopped around 1998.
Why 1998?
That's when a Norwegian Fisheries Act came into force that specifically prohibited intentional damage to known coral areas. So they assumed compliance, or at least a major slowdown in destruction after that point.
Got it. So they run the numbers, compare Model A and Model B against the historical data.
Yeah.
What did they find? Which story held up?
Well, the results were pretty clear-cut. The statistical analysis strongly favored Model A, the Essential Fish Habitat Model.
So the hardline version won out.
Yep. That EFH model provided the best statistical fit for explaining the patterns they saw in the catch and effort data over those years.
And the other one, Model B?
The facultative model, the nice-to-have version, its results were mostly statistically insignificant. Basically, the data didn't really support that weaker link.
Okay, so the CWC is confirmed as essential for this redfish stock, empirically. That's significant in itself.
It is. But the really novel finding, the bit that really makes this paper stand out, was how the CWC was essential. It wasn't just one effect.
Oh, what do you mean?
Within that winning EFH model, the analysis revealed that the amount of CWC habitat actually influenced 2 key population parameters for the redfish, not just one as often assumed.
2 parameters. Which ones?
It impacted both the stock's carrying capacity, usually called K in these models.
Right, the maximum number of fish the environment can sustainably support.
Exactly. And it also impacted the intrinsic growth rate, the
Yeah.
SRAT parameter. That's how quickly the population can naturally bounce back from being fished down or, recover from a low point.
Wow. So losing coral doesn't just mean less space or food for the maximum number of fish.
It also means the remaining fish reproduce or recover more slowly. Losing coral area simultaneously shrinks the potential size of the stock and slows down its ability to rebuild.
That sounds like, well, a much more severe impact than just affecting K alone. A double hit.
It's a devastating combination, ecologically speaking, and this structural finding that CWC affects both K and R leads directly to the core economic insight. It's all about something called output elasticity.
Elasticity. Okay, explain that. How sensitive is the output, the fish catch, to changes in the inputs, like coral area or fishing effort?
Exactly. They calculated the elasticity for both fishing effort and CWC area, and the comparison was, well, striking.
How so?
Okay, so the elasticity of harvest with respect to fishing effort, basically, how much more fish do you catch if you fish 1% harder? It showed diminishing returns. The number was between 0.76 and 0.94.
Meaning you put in 1% more effort, you get less than 1% more fish back. Standard stuff in fisheries, right? Overfishing starts to kick in.
Pretty standard, yes. But then they looked at the elasticity of harvest with respect to the CWC area. How much does the potential catch change if you change the coral area by 1%?
And what was that number?
It was consistently greater than 1. The average was between 1.5 and 1.6.
Wait, 1.5 to 1.6. More than 1.
Yes. This indicates increasing returns to scale for the habitat.
What does that mean in plain English?
It means the ecosystem punishes you disproportionately for damaging the habitat. If you lose, say, 10% of your coral area, you don't just lose 10% of your potential fish production, you lose maybe 15% or 16% of your production capacity.
Whoa! So every square kilometer of coral is actually becoming more valuable, relatively speaking, as the total area shrinks.
That's one way to look at it. It implies that protecting the remaining coral has an outsized positive benefit. Conversely, losing more coral has an outsized negative cost. It completely flips the usual economic thinking where you just focus on managing fishing effort.
Because the habitat itself is the more powerful lever here. Losing 1% of habitat costs you more than 1% of your fishery's potential. That's huge.
It's huge. It suggests that from a purely economic standpoint, for the long-term health of this specific fishery, investing in habitat protection yields a much bigger return than just trying to fine-tune fishing effort on a degraded habitat.
Okay, this increasing returns finding is pretty profound. Let's translate it into actual costs. What did the models say about the economic damage?
Right, using this best fit EFH model with its finding about KNR, they could estimate the marginal cost of coral loss.
Marginal cost meaning the cost of losing just one more unit.
Exactly. They calculated that losing just 1 square kilometer of this cold water coral habitat leads to an average annual loss of between 68 and 110 tons of redfish harvest every year.
68 to 110 tons gone every year from losing just 1 square kilometer. What's that in money terms?
At the time of the study, based on fish prices and exchange rates then, that single square kilometer loss translated to an annual revenue loss of somewhere between 445,000 and 718,000 Norwegian kroner.
Okay, and in US dollars for context.
Roughly 73,000 to 119,000 US dollars lost every single year. From that 1 square kilometer being destroyed, it's a permanent reduction in the fishery's potential output.
That's just the marginal loss. What about the total estimated damage, that 30–50% figure we talked about earlier?
Yeah, when they projected these marginal losses across that estimated total decline, the numbers become quite stark. They found this historical CWC decline likely caused average annual losses of between 11% and 29% in the total redfish harvest and revenue.
11 to 29% of the entire fishery's value. Just gone due to habitat loss.
Correct. And if you take the upper end of the damage estimate, that 50% CWC decline scenario,
What was the total loss then?
the calculated annual loss was 6,875 tons of redfish harvest. In revenue terms, that was over 44.8 million Norwegian kroner per year,
Which,
roughly 7.4 million US dollars lost annually. Due to the cumulative impact of bottom trawling on this essential habitat, the economic case for protecting what's left becomes incredibly strong.
absolutely. So given this powerful evidence linking habitat to dollars, what are the policy takeaways? What should managers do?
Well, the results scream for an ecosystems approach to fisheries management. You can't just manage the fish stock in isolation. You have to consider the essential habitat it relies on.
Especially when the habitat shows these increasing returns, right? The cost of doing nothing just gets worse faster.
Exactly. And given that CWC is, for all practical purposes, non-renewable, and our knowledge of its full extent is still limited, the paper argues pretty strongly against relying solely on market-based instruments.
Like individual transferable quotas, ITQs.
Right. Those might just incentivize fishers to find ways around the rules or move destructive gear to newly discovered, unprotected coral areas. The risk is too high.
So what's the alternative? Direct controls.
They suggest command and control instruments are probably more appropriate here. Things like area-based management setting up marine reserves or marine protected areas, MPAs, where bottom trawling is simply banned.
Or maybe gear restriction.
Or strict controls on the types of fishing gear allowed, yeah. Basically, direct interventions to protect the known and suspected coral locations. It really reinforces the need for a precautionary approach.
Meaning act before you have absolute certainty about the damage, because the potential cost of inaction is so high.
Precisely. The evidence suggests the long-term economic costs of this CWC damage likely far outweigh the short-term costs of restricting fishing in certain areas or ways.
Now, we should be fair. The researchers themselves noted some limitations, right? This wasn't the whole picture.
Correct. They were clear this is a partial analysis. It's very focused on the redfish CWC link, which it nails down convincingly. But they didn't assess the potential trade-off. That bottom trawling gear, while destructive to coral, might be the most economically efficient way to catch other valuable species like cod or haddock that don't depend on CWC.
So protecting CWC for redfish might mean accepting lower efficiency or higher cost for catching other fish. That's a complex management decision.
It is, Policymakers would need to weigh the quantified loss in the redfish fishery against potential impacts on other fisheries.
Any other limitations mentioned?
They also didn't attempt to quantify the non-use values of CWC.
Non-use values.
Yeah.
Like the value people place on just knowing the coral exists, its biodiversity value, independent of the fishery.
Exactly. Intrinsic value, bequest value, option value. All those things that economists try to capture but weren't included here. Adding those would only strengthen the economic argument for conservation, of course.
Okay. So wrapping this up, the core takeaway feels incredibly clear.
Yeah, this research provides strong quantitative evidence that cold water coral acts as a foundational, essential element for this commercially important redfish fishery.
And losing it isn't trivial. Losing just 1 square kilometer costs the fishery hundreds of thousands of kroners, potentially over 100,000 USD in lost revenue every single year.
It really hammers home that habitat isn't just some background scenery, it's critical economic infrastructure for the fishery.
And interestingly, the study implicitly points to 2 culprits for the redfish decline, doesn't it?
That's a really important synthesis, yes. There's the loss of the essential CWC habitat itself, with that powerful increasing returns effect, meaning habitat loss caused accelerating damage to the stock's potential.
And the second culprit?
The inefficiency of the management regime itself, likely open access or poorly regulated effort before interventions, that was reflected in the low diminishing returns to fishing effort. So both habitat destruction and suboptimal fishing pressure were driving the stock down.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, our listeners, to ponder.
The evidence is clear. Protecting essential habitat like CWC isn't just ecologically sound, it's economically vital, especially with these increasing returns. But the challenge remains.
How can future ocean management frameworks effectively balance the urgent need for habitat protection, particularly for non-renewable resources like these corals, with the parallel need to manage fishing efforts smartly, addressing that open access problem?
Getting both right simultaneously seems crucial for the long-term health of both the deep sea ecosystem and the fishing industry that depends on it. That integrated approach is really the puzzle moving forward.
A complex puzzle indeed. Until next time, keep diving deep.